I didn't expect the evening to become the moment my entire life split in two. It was supposed to be simple. Just dinner. Just family. Just another polite gathering where I smiled at the right moments and pretended not to notice the small things. The tone, the looks, the way I was slowly being erased. The restaurant was one of those modern rooftop places in Chicago, all glass walls and dim golden lighting. You could see the skylines stretching endlessly, sharp and cold like a promise that never belonged to me. My son Daniel had chosen it. Of course he had. Everything in his life had to look impressive. I arrived 5 minutes early, as always. Old habits. Respect for time, respect for people, values that apparently had gone out of fashion. Mia, over here. Daniel waved from across the room. I walked toward them, steady, composed, wearing the dark green dress I'd bought years ago and rarely used. It still fit. That surprised me. Maybe I had stayed the same longer than I should have. Daniel kissed my cheek quickly, distracted already. His watch buzzed, his phone lit up, his attention scattered in 100 directions, but never quite landing on me. "Happy birthday, Mom," he said. It sounded automatic. His wife, Chloe, leaned in next. Perfect hair, perfect smile, perfect everything, except warmth. "Mia, you look comfortable," she said. Comfortable. Not beautiful. Not elegant. Comfortable. I smiled anyway. Their daughter, Lily, barely looked up from her tablet. She mumbled something that might have been a greeting. Or maybe I imagined it. We sat. Orders were placed. Wine was poured. Conversation flowed, but not around me. Daniel talked about a new business deal. Chloe mentioned some event she was organizing. Lily complained about school. I nodded when appropriate, laughed when expected, and realized, slowly, quietly, that no one had asked me a single question. Not one. It's strange how silence can be louder than words. At some point, I stopped trying to join in. I just listened, observed, like a guest at a table where I used to belong. Then came the toast. Chloe stood up, lifting her glass with effortless grace. She always knew how to command attention. "I'd like to say a few words," she said. Everyone turned to her. Even Lily looked up. I felt a small flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this was real. Maybe I had been wrong. "To Mia," Chloe continued, smiling brightly. 70 years old today. A pause. Then she laughed softly. "Honestly, it's kind of inspiring. Still living alone, still managing everything by yourself, though I suppose it won't be long before we'll need to make other arrangements." The table chuckled. I didn't. She went on, her voice light, almost playful. "We've actually been talking about it, making sure you're taken care of. Somewhere safe. Somewhere appropriate." Daniel nodded slightly, as if this had already been discussed and decided. My hands went cold. "I mean," Chloe added, raising her glass higher, "we all know you've done your part. It's time to rest, right? Let professionals handle things." More laughter. Even Lily smirked. Something inside me didn't break. It shifted. That's the only way I can describe it. Like a door quietly closing. I lifted my glass because that's what was expected. Because dignity sometimes looks like silence. "To family," I said. My voice didn't tremble, but the word felt unfamiliar. The rest of the dinner passed like a distant echo. I tasted nothing, heard only fragments, smiled when required. When it ended, Daniel insisted on walking me out. "Don't take Chloe too seriously," he said casually. "She just likes to plan ahead." Plan ahead. For my disappearance. "I understand," I replied. And for the first time in years, I truly did. When I got home, the apartment felt different. Not empty. Clear. I stood in front of the mirror for a long time. Really looked at myself. Not as a mother. Not as a role. Just me. "Mia," I said quietly. The name sounded unfamiliar on my own lips. When was the last time someone had said it like it mattered? I sat down, still in my dress, and stared at the city lights outside my window. They thought my life was ending, that I was fading, that I would quietly step aside, become manageable, convenient, invisible. I let out a slow breath. No, I said, this time louder. No one heard it, but something in me did. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't call anyone. I didn't question myself. Instead, I opened my laptop. And for the first time in decades, I started making a plan that had nothing to do with anyone else. I didn't sleep that night, but it didn't feel like insomnia. It felt like awakening, the kind that comes quietly, without drama, when something inside you finally aligns. By morning, I wasn't exhausted. I was precise, focused, certain in a way I hadn't been in years. The city outside my window moved as always, cars, people, noise, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't reacting to life. I was about to direct it. The first thing I did was make coffee. Strong. No sugar. I sat at the small kitchen table, opened my laptop, and looked at my finances. Numbers don't lie, and they don't judge. Over the years, I had been careful. Careful with spending, careful with saving, careful with everything, except how I allowed people to treat me. My investments, my savings, the apartment, everything added up to something solid. Something real. Something mine. And suddenly, I realized something even more important. I wasn't dependent on anyone. Not Daniel. Not anyone. That thought didn't scare me. It freed me. By 9 a.m., I had already scheduled 2 appointments, one with my financial advisor and one with a lawyer. My hands didn't shake when I made the calls. My voice didn't hesitate. It was strange how easy it became once the decision was made. Like stepping through a door that had always been there, just waiting for me to notice it. At 10:30, my phone buzzed. Daniel. I looked at the screen for a few seconds before answering. Hey, Mom, he said. Just checking in. You okay after last night? There was something in his tone, not concern, not really. More like maintenance. Like checking a system to make sure it was still functioning. I'm fine, I said calmly. Good, good, he replied quickly. Chloe was worried you might have taken it the wrong way. Taken it the wrong way. I almost smiled. I understood it perfectly, I said. There was a pause. A small one, but enough. Right, well, we should probably sit down sometime and talk about next steps. You know, planning ahead. Planning ahead. Yes, I said. We should. But not in the way he expected. We ended the call politely. Cleanly. No tensión. No confrontación. That was new. At my financial advisor's office, everything felt oddly familiar. The polished desk, the soft lighting, the quiet confidence in the room. It reminded me of a version of my life where I had been taken seriously. My advisor, Mr. Reynolds, greeted me with a warm handshake. Mia, it's been a while. What brings you in? I want to restructure everything, I said. He raised an eyebrow slightly. Everything? Yes. We went through it step by step. Accounts, investments, liquid assets, long-term holdings. I asked questions I hadn't asked before. Not because I didn't understand, but because I had stopped caring enough to take control. That had changed. Are you planning a large purchase? He asked at one point. No, I said. Then after a pause, I added, I'm planning a different life. He studied me for a moment, then nodded. Understood. By the time I left, things were already in motion. Adjustments, transfers, possibilities opening. Next was the lawyer. That meeting felt heavier, more final. His office smelled faintly of old books and coffee. He spoke calmly, professionally, as I explained what I wanted. I'd like to update my will, I said. Of course, he replied. Any specific changes? Yes. I didn't rush. I didn't justify. I simply explained. Less going to Daniel, more going elsewhere. Some to organizations I believed in. Some held back, for decisions I hadn't made yet. He didn't question me. He just wrote. When I stepped back outside, the air felt different. Or maybe I did. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Chloe. I almost didn't answer, but I did. Mia, she said, her voice smooth as ever. Daniel told me you sounded distant. I'm just thinking, I replied. Well, don't overthink things, she said lightly. We're just trying to help you. You know that, right? Help. Such a beautiful word when used correctly. Such a dangerous one when it isn't. I know exactly what you're trying to do, I said. Silence. A longer one this time. I'm not sure what you mean, she replied carefully. That's all right, I said. You will. And then I ended the call. I didn't feel guilty. That surprised me the most. In the afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in years. I walked. No destination. No purpose. Just movement. The city felt different when you weren't rushing through it for someone else. I noticed details. The sound of heels on pavement, the way sunlight reflected off windows, the quiet conversations happening all around me. Life. Real life. Not the structured, scheduled version I had been living. At some point, I stopped in front of a small travel agency. I don't know why. Or maybe I do. Inside, it was quiet. Peaceful. Posters of places I had only ever seen in magazines lined the walls. Oceans. Mountains. Cities filled with history. A young woman approached me with a smile. Can I help you with anything? I looked at one of the posters. A coastal town, bright blue water, white buildings, endless sky. Yes, I said slowly. I think you can. We talked for almost an hour. Options. Destinations. Length of stay. I listened, asked questions, considered things I had never allowed myself to consider before. Travel alone. Time for myself. A life not defined by routine or obligation. When I left, I wasn't holding a ticket, but I was holding something else. A direction. That evening, I returned home and sat by the window again. The same city, the same view, but everything had changed. My phone lit up one more time. A message from Daniel. Mom, we need to talk. This is getting strange. I stared at it for a moment. Then I typed. Yes, we do. I didn't explain. I didn't soften it. I didn't add anything else. Because, for the first time in my life, I wasn't trying to make anyone comfortable. I was finally making space for myself. The meeting with Daniel happened 2 days later, but in truth, I had already left long before I sat across from him. Not physically, my apartment was still the same, my routine still recognizable, but internally, something had shifted beyond return. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even resentment anymore. It was clarity, and clarity has a way of stripping everything down to what actually matters. He chose the place, of course. A sleek cafe downtown, all glass and steel, the kind of place where people pretended to have important conversations while checking their phones every 30 seconds. I arrived first this time, not out of habit, but because I wanted to. I wanted those few quiet minutes to myself, to sit there and feel the weight, or rather, the absence, of what used to control me. Daniel walked in exactly on time. Same confident stride, same polished look, same presence that used to make me feel proud. Now I just observed him. Mia, he said, sitting down. No hug this time. That was new. Daniel, I replied. We ordered coffee. Black for me. Something complicated for him. Of course. He didn't waste time. Mom, what's going on? He asked. You've been off. The way you spoke to Chloe, the way you've been distant. It's not like you. Not like me. I almost laughed. You're right, I said calmly. It's not. He frowned. Then what is it? It's me, I replied. That seemed to irritate him more than anything else. Okay, I don't have time for riddles, he said, leaning forward. If something's wrong, just say it. We're trying to help you, but you're making it difficult. There it was again. Help. You keep using that word, I said. But I don't think it means what you think it means. He exhaled sharply. Mom, don't do this. Do what? This tone. This attitude. Ever since your birthday, you've been acting like we did something terrible. I held his gaze. You did. The words landed between us, heavy and undeniable. He blinked, caught off guard. It was a joke. No, I said quietly. It wasn't. Silence stretched. For the first time since he sat down, Daniel didn't have an immediate response. You all laughed, I continued. Not because it was funny, but because it was true. That's not fair, he said quickly. We were just trying to decide my future without me? I interrupted. His jaw tightened. We're family, he said. It's our responsibility to make sure you're taken care of. I've taken care of myself my entire life, I replied. And I'm still doing it. You're 70, Mom. Yes, I said. And I'm still here. That seemed to frustrate him more than anything. You're twisting this, he said. We're thinking long term. You living alone isn't sustainable forever. Maybe not, I agreed. But that decision will be mine. He leaned back, shaking his head slightly, like I was being unreasonable. This is exactly what I mean, he said. You're being stubborn. No, I said. I'm being clear. Another silence. This one different. Sharper. What do you want then? He asked finally. Such a simple question. Such a complicated answer. But not anymore. I want respect, I said. He looked at me, confused. You have respect. No, I said calmly. I have usefulness. That landed. He didn't interrupt this time. I drive when you need me to, I continued. I show up when it's convenient for you. I adjust, adapt, support, and in return, I get decisions made about my life as if I'm already gone. That's not how it is, he said, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. It is, I replied. You just never notice. He ran a hand through his hair, something he used to do when he was overwhelmed as a child. So what now? He asked. What are you saying? I took a sip of my coffee before answering. Not to delay, but because I could. I'm saying things are changing. His expression hardened. What does that mean? It means I'm not available the way I used to be, I said. No more automatic yes. No more assumptions. You're talking like we're taking advantage of you, he said. I didn't respond immediately, because silence sometimes is the answer. He looked away first. That's ridiculous, he muttered. Is it? I asked gently. Another pause. You're overreacting, he said, but now it sounded weaker.
I'm reacting appropriately. I corrected.
He checked his phone briefly, then put it face down. A rare gesture. Maybe for the first time, he realized this conversation mattered. So what? You're just stepping back from everything? He asked. Yes. And what does that look like exactly? It looks like me deciding how I spend my time, I said. Where I go. What I do. Who I help. That sounds selfish, he said. I met his eyes. No, I said quietly. It sounds new. That one stayed with him. I could see it. Chloe's going to think this is about her, he said after a moment. It is, I replied. He sighed. She didn't mean it the way you're taking it. She meant exactly what she said, I said. And more importantly, you agreed with her. That's not fair, he said again, but there was less resistance now. I'm not here to argue fairness, I replied. I'm here to set boundaries. The word felt strong, solid.
Mine.
He sat there, staring at me like he was trying to recognize someone he had never really seen before. You've changed, he said quietly. Yes, I said. A long pause followed. Not uncomfortable, just real. Finally, he nodded slightly. I don't know what to do with this, he admitted. That's okay, I said. You'll figure it out. And if I don't? I stood up, picking up my bag. Then things will stay different, I said. He looked up at me, something almost vulnerable in his expression. Are you leaving? He asked. I considered the question carefully. Not running away, I said. Just moving forward. I placed some cash on the table for my coffee. Take care, Daniel. And then I walked away.
Not fast.
Not dramatic. Just steady. Outside, the air felt lighter. Or maybe I did. For the first time in years, I hadn't explained myself. I hadn't softened the truth. I hadn't apologized for choosing myself. And as I walked down the street, blending into the rhythm of the city, one thought settled clearly in my mind. This was only the beginning. The trip wasn't impulsive. That's what surprised me the most. For years, I had imagined that if I ever did something drastic, it would come from emotion, from anger, from pain, from some breaking point that forced me into motion. But this wasn't that. This was deliberate.
Calm.
Thought through in a way that made it feel less like escape and more like arrival. 3 days after my conversation with Daniel, I booked the ticket. Italy. Not because it was dramatic or romantic or symbolic, but because it had always been somewhere I quietly wanted to see and never allowed myself to. There had always been a reason not to go. Timing, responsibility, practicality, someone else's needs. This time, there was only one question. Do I want this? And the answer had been immediate.
Yes.
The flight was long, but I didn't mind. I watched the clouds stretch endlessly beneath me, soft and indifferent to everything happening in my old life. No expectations, no roles, no history, just space. I realized somewhere over the Atlantic that I hadn't told Daniel exactly where I was going. I had sent a short message. I'm traveling. I'm safe. I'll be in touch when I'm ready. That was all. No details.
No timeline.
For the first time, I didn't feel obligated to explain. When I arrived in Rome, the air felt different, warmer, slower, almost as if time itself had softened. The city didn't rush. It didn't demand. It simply existed, layered with history, unapologetically alive. I checked into a small boutique hotel near the old streets, nothing extravagant, but full of character. Stone walls, narrow balconies, the faint smell of espresso drifting in from the street below. That first evening, I didn't plan anything. I just walked. There's something deeply unsettling and liberating about being somewhere no one knows you. No one looks at you with expectations. No one assumes anything about your life. You're just a person moving through space, anonymous and free. I found myself standing in front of Trevi Fountain almost without realizing how I got there. Tourists gathered around, throwing coins, making wishes, capturing moments. I watched them for a while, not joining in, just observing. Then, slowly, I reached into my pocket, found a coin, and held it for a moment. Not for luck, not for tradition, but as a quiet acknowledgement of something shifting inside me. I threw it anyway, not wishing to return, but accepting that I had finally arrived somewhere new. The next morning, I woke early.
No alarm. No obligation.
Just light filtering through the curtains and the distant hum of the city coming to life. I made coffee in the small machine in my room and sat by the window, watching people pass below, locals heading to work, tourists already lost in maps, couples arguing softly in a language I didn't understand but somehow still felt. For years, my mornings had belonged to someone else. Schedules.
Calls.
Responsibilities. Even when I was alone, I wasn't really alone. I was preparing, anticipating, adjusting. Now, there was nothing to prepare for, only to experience. I spent the day exploring without a plan. That became my rule. No strict itineraries, no rushing from place to place. I visited Colosseum, stood among ruins older than anything I had ever known, and felt something strange settle inside me. Perspective. Lives had come and gone here. Entire stories lived, ended, forgotten. And yet, the structure remained. Not perfect, not untouched, but standing. There was something comforting in that. I wasn't late to my life. I was simply still standing. In the afternoon, I sat at a small cafe tucked between narrow streets. No one spoke English around me. The waiter barely acknowledged me beyond taking my order. And yet, it felt more genuine than conversations I had been part of for years. No performance.
No expectation.
Just presence. I ordered something simple, pasta, wine, water, and allowed myself to sit there longer than necessary. I watched people, noticed details, The way someone laughed, the way another person gestured while speaking, the way life moved without asking for permission. At some point, I realized something that caught me off guard. I wasn't thinking about Daniel, or Chloe, or what they might be saying, doing, expecting. For the first time in years, they weren't at the center of my thoughts. That realization didn't feel like loss. It felt like space. Later that evening, back in my room, I finally turned my phone on. Messages flooded in instantly.
Calls.
Texts. Notifications stacked on top of each other, all carrying the same underlying tone: confusion, frustration, a growing sense of something slipping out of their control. One message from Daniel stood out. "Mom, this isn't like you. Please just tell me where you are." I stared at it for a moment. Then I typed, "You're right. This isn't like me." I didn't add anything else. I turned the phone off again. The next few days passed in a rhythm that felt both new and familiar, like remembering something I had forgotten I knew. I walked through streets without purpose, visited galleries, sat in parks, watched sunsets without checking the time. I spoke to strangers when I felt like it, and stayed silent when I didn't. There was no pressure to be interesting, useful, or accommodating. I was simply there. One afternoon, I found myself in a small art studio near the edge of the city. It wasn't on any map I had seen. I had just followed a street that looked interesting, then another, until I ended up there. Paintings covered the walls, some unfinished, some raw, some beautiful in ways that didn't try too hard. An older man stood behind a table, working quietly. He glanced up as I entered, nodded once, then went back to his work. No questions.
No expectations.
I walked around slowly, taking everything in: colors, textures, imperfections. It felt honest. "First time here?" he asked eventually, without looking up. "Yes," I said. He nodded again. "You don't look like a tourist." I smiled slightly. I'm not sure what I look like anymore. That made him pause. He looked at me properly this time. "That's not a bad place to be," he said. I didn't answer, because for the first time, I agreed. That evening, as I walked back to my hotel, the city glowing softly around me, one thought settled clearly in my mind. I hadn't lost anything. I had simply stepped out of a life that no longer fit. And now, piece by piece, I was building something that did. Not for anyone else. Not for approval. Not for expectation. But for me. By the second week in Rome, something inside me had stabilized. The initial lightness of freedom had settled into something deeper. Not excitement, not even happiness exactly, but a steady sense of ownership over my own life. I had routines now, but they were mine. Morning coffee by the window, long walks without direction, afternoons spent discovering corners of the city that didn't appear in guidebooks. I had even started writing again, small notes at first, observations, fragments of thought that slowly turned into something more structured. It felt like I was meeting myself after years of absence. That's why when my phone rang that morning, I almost didn't answer. But I did. "Mia." Daniel's voice came through, tight, controlled, but with something else underneath. "We need to talk." I leaned back in the chair, looking out at the narrow street below.
People passing.
Life continuing. "We've already talked," I said calmly. "No," he replied quickly. "Not like this. Not with you disappearing to another country without telling me where you are. I told you I was safe. That's not the point. It is to me." Silence. Then he exhaled sharply. "I'm in Rome," he said. For a moment, I thought I had misunderstood. "You're what?" I asked. "I'm here," he repeated. "At your hotel. The front desk confirmed you're staying here."
I didn't feel panic.
I didn't feel fear. I felt interruption. "I'll come down," I said. When I stepped into the lobby, I saw him immediately. Daniel stood near the entrance, looking out of place in a way I had never seen before. The city didn't bend around him the way his world back home did. Here, he was just another person, slightly lost, slightly out of rhythm. He turned when he heard my footsteps. For a second, neither of us spoke. You look different, he said finally. So do you, I replied. That wasn't entirely true. He looked the same. But something in his posture had shifted, less certainty, more tension. Can we sit? He asked. We moved to a small seating area near the window. The light fell softly across the room, and for a strange moment, it felt like we were strangers meeting for the first time. What are you doing here? I asked. I came to bring you back, he said. Straight to the point. I almost smiled. No, I said.
Just like that. No hesitación. No explanación.
He blinked, clearly not expecting that. You didn't even let me finish, he said. I don't need to, I replied. I already know the ending.
His jaw tightened.
Mom, this isn't a game. I know. Then stop acting like it is. I'm not acting, I said calmly. That's the difference. He leaned forward, lowering his voice slightly. You left without warning. You cut us off. Do you have any idea what that looked like from our side? Yes, I said. And I accepted it. That's not how family works, he snapped.
No, y replica quietly.
That's exactly how it works when respect is missing. That stopped him. For a moment. Then he shook his head. This is about that dinner again, he said. You're still holding on to that? I'm not holding on to it, I said. I moved because of it. That's an overreaction. No, I said. It was a realization. He ran a hand over his face, frustration building. Chloe didn't mean. Stop, I said. Not loud, not aggressive, but final. He froze. For once, I continued, this isn't about what Chloe meant. It's about what I understood. He stared at me, trying to find the version of me that would soften, that would bend, that would explain herself until everything felt comfortable again. She wasn't there. So what now? He asked. You just stay here forever? I stay where I choose, I replied. And what about us? I considered that carefully. You're still my son, I said. That hasn't changed. Then why does it feel like it has? Because the terms have. He leaned back, absorbing that. You're serious, he said quietly. Yes. And if I say I need you to come back? I met his eyes. You don't need me, I said. You're just used to having me. That one hit. I saw it. He looked away first this time. That's not fair, he muttered. It's accurate, I replied. A long silence followed. Not tense, just honest. People moved around us, speaking different languages, living lives that had nothing to do with this moment. And for the first time, I realized how small our conflict really was in the context of everything else. I don't understand you anymore, he said eventually. That's okay, I replied. You're meeting me for the first time? He let out a short, almost bitter laugh. My own mother. Yes. Another pause. Then, more quietly. Are you happy? He asked. That question surprised me. Not because of the words, but because of the way he said them. I thought about it, about the past days. The walks. The silence. The absence of pressure. Yes, I said. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just truthfully. He nodded slowly. I don't think I've ever heard you say that like that, he admitted. That's because I've never meant it like this before. He sat there for a long moment, processing something I couldn't fully see. So what do I tell Chloe? He asked finally. That's your conversation, I said. She's not going to like this. I know. And if things change because of this? I tilted my head slightly. They already have. That lingered. He stood up after a while, not abruptly, not angrily, just accepting that the conversation had reached its natural end. I booked a flight back tomorrow, he said. I thought I'd be bringing you with me. You're not, I replied gently. He nodded. I see that now. For a second it looked like he might say something more. But instead he just said, Take care, Mom.
Mia. He corrected softly. He paused.
Then gave a small, almost uncertain nod.
Mia.
And then he walked away. I stayed where I was for a few minutes, watching the space he had occupied slowly return to normal.
No dramatic ending. No final argument.
Just a shift. When I finally stood up and stepped back out into the street, the city welcomed me the same way it always had, without expectation. And as I walked, one thought settled clearly in my mind. I hadn't just left my old life behind. I had redefined what it meant to belong in my own. I didn't leave Rome right away after Daniel flew back. That would have felt like closing something too quickly, like ending a chapter before fully understanding it. Instead, I stayed. Not because I was hiding anymore, but because, for the first time in my life, I wasn't rushing toward anything or away from anyone. I was simply allowing myself to exist exactly where I was. Days passed quietly, but not empty. I had begun to recognize the rhythm of the streets, the cafe owners who no longer saw me as a stranger, the corners of the city where light fell differently at certain hours. I wasn't visiting anymore, I was living. And that distinction mattered more than I had ever realized. In the mornings, I wrote. Not for anyone. Not for an audience. Just for myself. Thoughts I had ignored for years finally had space to form into something coherent. I wrote about the dinner. About Daniel. About the slow erosion of respect that I had mistaken for normal life. But I also wrote about something else. Something I had never fully explored before. What I wanted. Not what was expected. Not what was reasonable. Not what fit neatly into someone else's version of me. Just what I wanted. That question turned out to be harder than I thought. Because when you spend years adjusting yourself to others, you forget how to answer it honestly. One afternoon, I found myself back near Trevi Fountain, the same place where I had thrown a coin days earlier. This time, I didn't stop immediately. I walked past it, continued down the street, then turned back, not out of obligation, but curiosity. The crowd was just as dense, the noise just as constant. But I was different. I stood there for a moment, watching people repeat the same ritual: coin, wish, hope. And for the first time, I understood something clearly. Most people weren't wishing for something new. They were wishing for permission. Permission to change, to leave, to begin again. I didn't need permission anymore. I had already taken it. That realization settled deeply inside me. Later that day, I made a decision. Not a dramatic one. Not something that would shock anyone. But something that mattered. I wasn't going back to my old life. Not to live. Not to return to the patterns I had finally stepped out of. But I wasn't disappearing either. I would go back to the United States, but on my terms. A different city. A different home. A different structure. A life that reflected who I had become. Not who I used to be. That evening, I turned my phone on and, for the first time without hesitation, called Daniel. He answered quickly.
Mia.
His voice carried something new. Not control. Not expectation. Uncertainty. Yes, I said. There was a pause, like he wasn't sure how to begin. Are you okay? He asked. I am. Another pause. I've been thinking, he said, about what you said. About everything. I listened. I didn't realize how much we relied on you, he continued. Not just practically, but without asking what you wanted in return. That was the closest thing to an apology I had ever heard from him. I know, I said. And Chloe, he hesitated, she still doesn't fully get it. But she's starting to understand that things aren't going back to how they were. They won't, I replied calmly. I figured. Silence again. But this time, it wasn't uncomfortable.
It was honest.
So what happens now? He asked. I'm coming back, I said. Relief entered his voice immediately. Really? Yes, I continued. But not to the same life. He didn't interrupt. I'll be living differently, I said. Different place. Different routine. Different boundaries. Okay, he said slowly. And our relationship, I added, will depend on respect, not expectation. I understand, he said. And, for the first time, I believed him. After we ended the call, I sat by the window, watching the city settle into night. Lights flickered on, voices softened, the energy shifted from movement to stillness. I thought about everything that had happened. The dinner, the silence, the decision, the distance, the confrontation.
And now, this.
It wasn't a perfect ending, but it wasn't supposed to be. It was something better. It was real. A week later, I packed my suitcase. Not the same way I had when I arrived. There was no hesitation now.
No uncertainty.
Just movement forward. At the airport, as I waited for my flight, I caught my reflection in the glass. I looked the same, and completely different. There was something in my posture, in my eyes.
Clarity.
When I landed back in the United States, I didn't go to Daniel's house. I checked into a small temporary apartment I had rented in advance. Neutral space.
My space.
The city felt familiar, but I didn't step back into it the same way. I moved through it with intention now, not habit. Over the next weeks, I found a permanent place, a smaller apartment, modern, filled with light, located somewhere that didn't revolve around anyone else's convenience. I chose everything myself. Furniture, colors, arrangement, details that might seem small but weren't, because every choice was mine. Daniel visited a few times. Alone at first, then once with Lily. Conversations were careful, but genuine.
No assumptions. No demands.
Just learning each other again. Chloe came once. Polite. Measured. Observing. I didn't try to win her over. I didn't need to. Time would do what it needed to do. Months passed. Life settled. But not into routine, into alignment. I built something steady. Something real. I explored interests I had ignored. Met people who knew me without history. Without expectations tied to who I used to be. And one evening, almost a year later, I sat by my window again, different city, different view, same quiet moment, and realized something that made me smile. They had been right.
In a way.
The version of me they knew was gone. She had become a memory, but not in the way they expected. Because in her place, I had finally become myself. And this time, I wasn't fading. I was just beginning.